Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and welcome to another episode of the EV Answer Man. In this episode, we're going to talk, we're going to hopefully answer, but we're going to discuss a question that comes up quite often, and that is, where do I start? How do I get started, and what do I need to do first? And it's because there's so many aspects of the conversion that are interrelated. They're all interrelated. And people just don't know how to make the initial decisions on how to get started. And so we're going to discuss that. So stay with us. So basically the things that we're going to want to consider are the vehicle, how far we want to go, the performance, how much do we have to spend, and that's our starting point. And most people have a vehicle picked out. By the time they call us, they typically have a good idea. They either already have the vehicle or they definitely have one in mind. So in our workshops, we discuss a lot about vehicles and making a good vehicle choice. I'm not going to do that in this video, but we're going to talk about how vehicle choice affects your range, your performance and budget, and so forth. So I'll show you a little chart that I've come up with that relates with that, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail. So here I have a little chart, and the vehicle choice is going to affect the weight of your conversion, and it's going to affect the cost of your conversion. And the weight then is going to dictate your motor controller size. It's going to dictate your pack size. And of course your pack size will dictate weight. Your pack size is also going to dictate cost. Your motor controller size will dictate cost. Pack size, will dictate range, which has that cost also. So the more range you want, the more it's going to cost. But let's be a little more specific about the vehicle. The vehicle choice will not only have an effect on the weight of your conversion, but the cost also in the aspect that does it have a manual or automatic transmission, the subsystems required like power brakes, power steering, all-wheel drive, so forth. All those things will affect the cost. But we're not going to get into a lot of that in this discussion. We're going to talk about how it affects the weight and how the weight affects these other things. So let's go with a common vehicle weight. And for our discussion, we're going to go with, say, a 2,600 pound vehicle. That's fairly common conversion. We could bump it up to 3,000, but for the sake of discussion this time we'll do that. The weight affects the motor controller in this way. If you have a vehicle that weighs less than 2,000 pounds, you can go with an 8-inch DC motor. You can go with a smaller AC motor, and the smaller motor has a smaller price tag. Your next kind of step in your motor controller setup size would be from 2,000 pounds to 3,000 pounds. And at that point, we're talking about on the DC side, like the Warp 9, or an AC 50. They'll all work in that. And there's a certain price tag associated with these. If you have a light vehicle, or even if you have one in this range that isn't going to have heavy demands on it, mostly city driving, that kind of thing, you could go with the Curtis controller, 1231C. You could go with the Avnetics Soliton. Couldn't remember the name of there. You could go with the Soliton Junior or the Soliton 1. Soliton 1. That's how they do it. Okay. And these all have a price increment to them. And so you can see how as our weight goes up, so will our price. And again, we have some decisions there to affect that. The difference in cost between these two is about double. In other words, these are about $1,500 for the Curtis 1231C, and you're looking at about $3,000 for the Soliton 1, and about $2,000 for the Soliton Junior. The other aspect with the Solitons, are they're liquid cooled, so now you have the additional component cost of liquid cooling, where the Curtis is air cooled. And then you have the next increment is another 1,000 pound, where you go from 3,000 to 4,000. And at that point, you can go up to the 11-inch DC, or you could go with, say, an AC 75. And the next one I would just term as greater than 4,000 pounds. And so each one of these steps increases our cost. And so that affects the budget that we were talking about. And so we're going to keep our costs down. For this example, we'll go with a 2,600 pound car. The Porsche 924s and the 944s are all in that range. A lot of your smaller imports will fall in that range. And so typically what will happen is, here's our curb weight, but we're going to remove the engine, the cooling system, the gas tank, the exhaust, and so forth. And in doing so, we're going to lose about 400 pounds. And, you know, that's variable based on the vehicle also. So we're going to gain that back, though, with batteries. So let's take a look at how the weight then translates to our pack size. We've seen how it translates to the motor controller options. Let's go see what it looks like on our battery end. So how it's going to affect our pack size is that the weight will dictate how much energy per mile is required to move that vehicle. And the formula that seems to be closest that we've observed is we take the weight of the vehicle, divide it by 10, and that would be the watt hours per mile required to move that vehicle. And so that is going to be that determiner. So by keeping the weight of the vehicle down, we're going to use less watt hours per mile. Heavier the vehicle, the more we're going to consume. So the range then is basically going to be the size of our pack divided by the energy requirement, the watt hours per mile. And so the larger this number and the lower that number, the greater this number. So let's back up just a hair here. How do you determine the pack size? Well, the pack size is going to be the voltage times the amp hour rating of your cells. That would be your pack size. But then we're going to also multiply that by 0.8, because that will give us the usable capacity of that pack. The total capacity is not usable. We only have 80% of that we're going to use. And if you don't use all that, the better. So let's we can run some scenarios here to help clarify this. One is, based on what you want to do, which is under the performance part here. If you want to have a freeway capable car that can travel on the freeway, then you're going to want to go with a 120 volt or greater battery pack. Less than that, they're just not really performance-wise freeway compatible. So the higher the voltage, the higher your top end will be. It also allows you to get a larger capacity pack. But the higher the voltage, the greater the number of cells. Because if you're going to be using your lithium iron phosphate cell, the nominal voltage is 3.34 volts per cell. So if you want to have, say, a 170 volt pack, that's 51 cells. And if you're going to go with a 180 amp hour cell, they run about $259 times 51. That's $13,209. So you can see how all this is interrelated. The larger our pack, the greater the cost. Also, those 51 cells would run, they're about 12.5 pounds per cell. And so 51 of those that's 638 pounds. So 638 pounds, we looked at before, we've taken out maybe 400 or 500 pounds by removing the engine and so forth. Maybe even it's 600 pounds. Well, we've gained that all back with just our battery pack. And so we're starting to see the relationship here. So what you're going to need to do is do some research. And in that research, you want to check out your component options like we talked about. What is the capability of the different components? Be careful not to, you know, try to skimp. I've known people that try to use a smaller motor on a heavier vehicle and so forth. That's a recipe for problems, and it's just going to, in the long run, increase your costs. So make sure you make the appropriate choices. And so you will start to put together those things that will fit for your car. For instance, the 2,600-pound vehicle that we talked about, you know, we could go with the AC50. We know what that costs. That's good up to, depending on which controller you choose, up to 170 volts, I believe, on the one. The other, the 1238-7601 is good up to 130 volts. And so you can start putting this together. And so you're going to do the research and see what's available and what fits your scenario, and then you can run some calculations. And let me show you some sample calculations and how that kind of looks through different scenarios. We'll change our weight and so forth. So let's take a look at that. Okay, hopefully this shows up well enough. So what I've done, I have a little spreadsheet that I use so I can do these calculations quickly, but I showed you how to do the calculation. So here's a 2,600-pound vehicle, and using a voltage of 173 volts, which I believe is 52 batteries. Let me do the math here real quick. 173 divided by, yep, that'd be 52 cells. And that would give us, based on that weight, you see we have 260 watt-hours per mile. And pack size is basically, that'd be a 31.1 kilowatt-hour pack. And that would give us a maximum safe range of 96 miles. Well, let's say, you know, I don't want a 173 volt pack. Let me drop this down to a common one that we use, 146 volt. Now my safe range has dropped down to 81. And in actuality, my weight would have dropped also, if that weight was based on the first example. But we're using just a fixed weight at this moment, just to kind of get a comparison. It would, of course, affect, as the weight changed, it would affect our watt-hours per mile and then affect our range also. Let's look at how that also affects our weight and cost on the other side of the spreadsheet. On this side, I have the weight of the vehicle. Again, it shows the pack size, the energy required, the range that we were going for, our cell size. So it'll show us what our pack voltage is. This one's showing 53. It just depends on the calculations that we put in here for it to calculate. But the battery pack weight would be about 662 pounds, and the cost would be $13,000. So let's say we make a little change here. Let's drop this down to 2,200 pounds. So now our pack size requirement drops our cost drops, the number of cells would drop, our voltage requirement. All this is to stay at that 100-mile range. So our weight dropped about 100 pounds. The cost went down about $2,000. So forth. So we've gone through all this type of thing in a previous video. I'm just showing you to kind of help you understand the big picture, how all these things are interrelated. The battery pack size affects the cost, it affects the weight. Your vehicle choice and your range desires affect those things also. So to answer the question, how do you get started? What do you need to do first? Well, probably need to decide on a vehicle. And then you need to be realistic about what your range needs are. Everybody wants 100 miles or more. Everybody wants the thing to scream like the white zombie. And everybody wants to do it for $20,000. Well, you know, you don't like to disappoint people, but you know, at this point in time, a vehicle with more than 100 miles of range that is freeway capable is going to cost you probably more than $20,000. Unless you're just very creative and have some connections of one sort or another, it's just not something that can be expected. So you got the vehicle picked out, you're going to be reasonable about those decisions. You don't want a, you know, suburban four-wheel drive and want to go 100 miles and so forth, unless you have deep pockets. And so these are the things that you would need to kind of set ahead of time. You're probably going to have some a wake-up call on this one. You know, realistic budget for most freeway-capable vehicles that have close to 100-mile range is in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. That's not to say that you can't do it closer down here. It's going to depend on the car and the weight of that vehicle. So choose a vehicle that's going to suit your needs and that you like. Be mindful of its weight and aerodynamics. You know, 80% of Americans drive less than 40 miles a day. If that's you, range isn't going to be an issue. That's an easy one to do. You can do that with you know, 15 kilowatt hour pack or less. Well, I hope this was helpful. Kind of give you an idea of the considerations for getting started on a EV conversion. But if you have any questions, you can contact us at info@evforyounow.com. And to give you an idea of what different component packages cost, you can visit our website at evforyounow.com. And once again, we thank you for watching.